I'm usually fairly positive about stadiums, so a video like this really isn't the type I like to make. But it was requested by several viewers, and so were the stadiums that you'll see in this video. Not all of the teams need to abandon their stadium entirely. Some stadiums just need some major TLC. So with that being said, here are 10 teams that desperately need a new stadium, or at least a major renovation. Buffalo Bills. Now I have to point out that the stadiums in this video aren't necessarily bad. I'm just comparing them to their competition. And the NFL probably sets the bar higher than any other league. Also, teams will just move to another city if they don't get a good enough venue. Highmark Stadium is closer to a college stadium than it is to any of its NFL counterparts. There's no fancy exterior or interior design elements, just a sunken bowl with an upper deck on either side. It's as basic as it gets in this league. Which makes sense because it's also one of the oldest. But it doesn't have that same sort of untouchable status that Lambeau does. So the Bills are certainly looking to build a new one soon, but it's yet to get off the ground. Luton Town. Kenilworth Road has been their home for well over 100 years, and it certainly looks its age. It actually makes me slightly sad to look at it from street level. If I had to guess, I'd say that was some sort of meat processing facility. And not even for human consumption. They're chopping up camel meat to make pet food in there. But not only is it rough around the edges, there's not even enough room for the edges. The southeastern corner looks as if it's been sliced off by the adjacent road. So an expansion is nearly impossible. And if the club wants to rise the ranks, it needs something a bit bigger. Thankfully, they are planning on building a new stadium. Hopefully it does actually come to fruition. New York City FC. Now this one is pretty straightforward. They're a team representing the huge city of New York in a league that has some great boutique football stadiums. And they're playing in a baseball stadium. Don't get me wrong, Yankee Stadium is fine for baseball, but I don't think anyone would say that it's ideal for any sort of football. Their rivals, the New York Red Bulls, play in another state, but at least they have a purpose-built stadium. There have been various proposals over the years for a new stadium, but it's still to be determined where they will end up. Surely, if they're called New York City FC, they won't build a stadium in Jersey. But it would be quite funny to say I'm driving to Jersey City to watch New York City. Tampa Bay Rays. They say build it and they will come, but they don't say how long it will take. Tropicana Field was nearly a decade old by the time Tampa Bay finally attracted an MLB team. It's now the only MLB stadium with a fixed roof, and yes, that does have its benefits. There aren't many rain delays, no birds, no wind, etc. But I just don't like the idea of playing a summer sport like baseball without the risk of skin cancer. Despite having more seats than Fenway Park, Tropicana Field actually has the lowest capacity in the major leagues. And that's because they have to top off some of the undesirable seats. On top of all that, it features 4 rings of catwalks over the top of the field which occasionally get in the way of a flying baseball. Manchester United. Now, hang on a minute, hang on. I said these were suggested by viewers. I like it, okay? The Theatre of Dreams, as it's known, is one of the world's most iconic football stadiums. But it's not without its issues. Some complaints are about the cramped seating, rodent infestation, leaky roof, and narrow concourses. And for a club like Man United, you'd expect a world-class facility. But let's be real, they're not going to be moving. It's a part of the club's flesh and blood. I'd much rather see a major renovation than a demolition. It just has too much history, and that is the likely scenario. Calgary Stampeders. If you disagree that Highmark Stadium looked like a college stadium, then surely you'll agree that McMahon Stadium does, and a fairly basic one at that. In fact, it's actually owned by the University of Calgary, and hosts their team, the Calgary Dinos. And you might be thinking, it's just the CFL, I'm sure that'll do just fine. But another CFL stadium in a place called Regina looks like this. Are you going to be bested by a place called Regina? Also, Calgary's hockey counterparts have an arena that looks like a saddle, yet they're the ones with the horse as their mascot. So if not a new stadium, at least give it a makeover and turn it into a horseshoe. Crystal Palace. I actually love the old-fashioned look of Selhurst Park, but it comes with a lot of downsides. There are quite a few seats that have restricted views, some directly behind a pillar, and some seats are actually wooden. Great for termites, not so much for people. The concourses are also very cramped. All of this for a team called Crystal Palace, which sounds about as opulent as you can get. Thankfully, the club is planning a redevelopment that'll give at least part of the stadium the amenities that the supporters deserve, as well as an aesthetic that resembles the Crystal Palace that the club is indirectly named after, whilst retaining some of its old-fashioned charm. Oakland Athletics. I'm sure you were expecting this one. Out of all the stadiums in the video, I can understand the hatred for this one the most. It's the last remaining football-baseball hybrid stadium in Major League Baseball. It now has no football tenant, so it has a ton of outfield seating that's sole purpose nowadays is to block what was a pretty nice view of the nearby hills. It also has more foul territory than a poultry farm, and speaking of foul, it's known to have sewage issues. The only positive I can possibly think of is that, unlike Tropicana Field, it is an outdoor stadium so you can enjoy the sunshine. There have of course been some designs drawn up for a new ballpark in Oakland, but a move to Las Vegas is also a possibility. It would be very tempting to the owner. Fiorentina. From an aesthetic standpoint, Stadio Artemio Franchi is an absolute beauty, at least in my eyes. But it's also one of the most unusual shapes for a football stadium. It's in the shape of the letter D, which apparently has something to do with Mussolini. Yes, he was a dickhead, but I think that's unrelated, which is not only slightly disturbing, but leads to some very uncomfortable sightlines. Some people would have to crane their neck a good 45 degrees to watch the game. Much like Old Trafford, I wouldn't actually want to see it demolished, it's just too historic. But I feel like it could potentially convert into a rectangular stadium, which would kill two birds with one wrecking ball. Crusaders. The team from Christchurch have been without their own stadium since the 2011 earthquakes caused irreparable damage to Lancaster Park, so they've been playing out of what is essentially a pop-up stadium ever since. It has actually been around for quite some time, but prior to 2012 it was just a tiny little stadium. Being a fairly successful team means that the demand for tickets is often much more than this stadium can accommodate. On top of that, it's owned by the local rugby league governing body, and the Crusaders are a rugby union team, which can't possibly be ideal. Thankfully, there are plans for a new stadium, but it won't be coming until 2025 at the soonest. And I don't believe any designs have been finalized as of yet. And that's it for today's video. If you have any other suggestions for teams that desperately need a new stadium or a renovation, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, have a good one.